All right, let's dive into one of the most brilliant and, frankly, bizarre political speeches you've probably never heard of. It was a message delivered in English, but it sounded like it was straight out of an ancient Greek myth. A speech so cleverly coded that everyone understood it, but at the same time, it sounded completely alien.
So I want you to picture this. You're at a high-stakes World Bank meeting in 1959. Everything's super formal, very serious, and then the governor of the Bank of Greece gets up and says this. He starts talking about the Scylla of numismatic plethora and the Charybdis of economic anemia. I mean, you'd think you'd walked into a dramatic reading of Homer's Odyssey, not a meeting on monetary policy.
So, what on earth was going on? Was this just some clever gimmick, a way to show off his country's deep linguistic roots? Or was there a much sharper, much more critical message hidden underneath all that mythological language? Well, that's the mystery we're unpacking today.
Okay, so at first glance, what the speaker, Xenophon Zolotas, was doing looked like a masterful linguistic stunt. He was basically throwing down a challenge, showing off the incredible power and influence of his native Greek language on a global stage.
Here was the game he was playing, the challenge he set for himself. He was going to deliver a speech in English, but, and get this, he would use a vocabulary that was almost entirely Greek in origin. His whole point was that the Greek language is so deep in the DNA of English that he could, as he put it, give a speech in Greek which would still be English to everybody. It was a really powerful display of cultural pride.
And you got to remember the setting here. This wasn't some sleepy university lecture hall. This was a formal, high-powered meeting of the World Bank in Washington, D.C. And the craziest part? The stunt worked. It totally worked. Despite the strange vocabulary, the audience of seasoned bankers and diplomats got his economic message loud and clear. The meaning just cut right through the unusual words.
But the fact that they understood him so perfectly, well, that raises a really important question. Was Zolotas just a proud patriot playing a clever language game? Or was there something more urgent, something much more political being said between the lines? To find out, we have to take a look at what was actually happening in his country at the time.
You see, to really understand the true purpose of this speech, you have to understand the Greece of the 1950s. We're talking about a country walking on a razor's edge, caught between a really painful past and a deeply uncertain future.
This was the reality on the ground. Post-war Greece was shattered after a brutal civil war. Its recovery was incredibly fragile and almost entirely dependent on American aid from the Marshall Plan. But by the late 50s, that recovery was starting to stall out, and the whole political system felt like it could just crack apart at any moment.
And this is the trap that Zolotas was describing with that mythological metaphor of his. On one side, you have the sea monster of numismatic plethora. That's runaway inflation that just devours people's savings. On the other side, you have the whirlpool of economic anemia, a weak, stagnant economy that offers no jobs and no hope. Greece was caught right between the two.
The pressure was just immense. The nation's democracy was shaky, political dissent was often silenced, and the economy was completely dependent on foreign money. And, to make matters even worse, a bitter international crisis over Cyprus was creating what Zolotas himself called a cacophony, just this chaotic mess of financial and political arguments, many of them with the very people in his audience.
So, with all that as a backdrop, let's go back to the speech itself. Because those strange, Greek-derived words, they weren't just fancy window dressing. They were surgical strikes, each one aimed at a very specific target.
Take this incredible phrase. He stood up in front of the entire world and declared that politicians are cryptoplethoricists. Now, it sounds academic, right? Almost harmless. But what does it actually mean?
Well, for starters, Zolotas just invented the word. A cryptoplethorist is someone who secretly loves and creates inflation, the plethora, while pretending to hate it. This was a direct, devastating accusation. He was publicly shaming the leaders of his own country, accusing them of economic sabotage just for short-term political gain.
But he wasn't done yet. After he went after the politicians, he turned his sights on another group, warning against something he called plethorophobia, a condition he claimed was, quote, endemic among academic economists.
This was the other side of his argument. He was basically saying, if the politicians are secretly causing inflation, then the academic economists are suffering from plethorophobia, an irrational fear of it. He argued their timid, overly cautious advice was paralyzing the country, preventing the kind of bold strategies needed for real growth. In one speech, he called out both the recklessness of the politicians and the cowardice of the experts. It was amazing.
You see, this wasn't a one-time gimmick. Zolotas used this exact technique twice, and when you understand the difference between the two speeches, you see his true escalating purpose. He was literally wielding language as a weapon.
His first Hellenic speech back in 1957 was kind of a subtle warning shot, a gentle critique of the government's policies, particularly around the Cyprus crisis. But 2 years later, when absolutely nothing had changed, he came back. And that 1959 speech, it wasn't a warning anymore. It was a sharp, public diagnosis of a sick system, a direct accusation of political malpractice.
And this is what reveals who Xenophon Zolotas really was. He wasn't just a patriot. He was a technocrat, an expert who believed in sound, logical policy. He saw politics corrupting economics, so he used the perceived purity and logic of ancient Greek to expose the chaos and corruption of modern policy.
It really leaves us with a fascinating question to think about. When does a speech stop being just a collection of words and become something more? An act of protest, a diagnosis, or even a weapon? Zolotas showed us that sometimes the most powerful critiques are hidden right there in plain sight, just waiting to be decoded.